So Paul said, I don't want you to be ignorant of spiritual things. The world is not going to get less spiritual in the end. It's going to get more spiritual. And really, the world is preparing us to believe in aliens, to believe in alien abductions, to believe in UFOs, and all of these things that's now coming out in the Congress, in the Senate, on primetime news, and intelligence briefings. They're preparing us to believe and receive the demonic supernatural. That's what it's all doing. So we as the church, we have to be educated, we have to be trained, we have to be equipped, we have to be powerful. And so I was able to tell Sister Ruby yesterday, I said, well, I can actually prophesy too. I could sometimes get people's names and birthdays and addresses and tell them things in the future. She said, really? I thought only the Buddhists can do that. I said, no. I said, Christians can do that too. I said, because God knows everything. So when we pray, God can give us something to tell somebody. I said, but guess what? Angels and spirits and demons, the unseen realm, they know you, they know your mother, they know your grandmother, they know where you went to school, they know what you like to eat. They know this information about you. And this Buddhist monks, they can also talk to the spiritual realm. But you don't want to talk to the spiritual realm because you don't know what spirit you're talking to. The only source we should turn to is God. And she said, oh, that makes sense. Yeah. I don't want information from a demon. I want information from God, right? So, but the thing is, they're open to the supernatural. And so when the church stops speaking in tongues, when the church stops prophesying, when the church stops seeing miracles, they will be attracted to this, the psychics and the witchcraft and all that stuff. So we have to be educated. We have to be equipped. We have to be prepared on spiritual things. So we found out last week that there's different administrations and operations of the spiritual realm, right? So we're talking about operations and administrations. Then we found out last week that after all the gifts are listed, after all the healings, miracles, prophecies, and tongues, and all that is listed, he tells us in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, he says, though I speak with the tongues of humans and the tongues of angelos. In the Greek, this is angelos, which means angelic. It doesn't mean angels, it means angelic. Or another word for angelic could be heavenly. Can you say with me, heavenly? So though I speak with the tongues of men and heavenly or angelic languages, if I have not charity, I am a sounding brass and a tinkling cymbal. If I have not charity. Charity means love. It's another word for love. So, two things I want to say here. Number one, the tongues of men are earthly languages. In other words, it's human languages. Then the tongues of angels is the heavenly language. The heavenly language is what we call unknown tongues. There's been a lot of false teaching, and it's with good intention, I believe. It's misunderstanding, but there's a lot of teaching that says speaking in tongues is another earthly dialect that God gives you to evangelize. And that's actually inaccurate. And I understand why they believe that and how they teach that, but that's inaccurate. Speaking in tongues, if you look at chapter 14, verse 1, or verse 2, he says, speak, for he that speaks in an unknown tongue. So even the translator, this word unknown is in italics, actually, which means it's not there in the translation. But even the translators back 400 years ago, under the authority of King James, even the translators understood that this tongue was the angelos from the chapter before. This was the angelic language. So they understood that this was an angelic language. For he that speaks in an angelic language, and one of the reasons that confirmed that interpretation that's an unknown tongue is because it tells you in the verse, speaks not to men, but to God. Okay? We could put that on the shelf. But let's zero in on this part. For no man understands him. That's why it's unknown tongue. So when we talk about speaking in tongues, we're not talking about human dialects. Is Spanish a language that men can understand? Is Arabic a language that men can understand? Is Hebrew a language that men can understand? Human. Is Vietnamese? Vietnamese. I always say monies. No, I always say nummies, Vietnamese. Vietnamese, a language that human can understand. Humans. Yes. So, if tongues is a language that no man understands, that means it's not a human language. And it's important that I share this with you because you'll leave here and you'll go on YouTube and you'll see somebody saying tongues is given so you could preach to the Russians and you don't know Russian. Or they'll have some testimony of someone who misunderstood what happened. Oh, so-and-so was in China and they spoke in Chinese and everyone understood him. No, that's not what happened. They spoke in tongues and the people there heard the interpretation of tongues. Just like it happened in Acts chapter 2. We went over that exercise last week, right? We all began to say our name out loud, and we were not able to make out what language or what name. We couldn't hear one name because we were all talking, and there was like 10 of us. Imagine 120 people that had cloven tongues of fire on their head, shouting and crying and shaking and at the top of their lungs in all these different dialects. You wouldn't be able to hear somebody, what they were saying. They were able to identify their language, not because there was the 50th person in the back of the room that was speaking it, it's because they all were hearing the language in which they were born. So what was really a roar to the natural ear, God was interpreting to them in their own language and that they were born. Probably some of them even in dialects that their families don't even speak. A dialect that they learned in their birth town. I would not be surprised. Because it says in the languages in which we were born. Not the common language that we speak. The Greek or the Aramaic, which is common. But even the languages we only speak with our grandparents. We're hearing here right now. So, tongues is chapter 13, verse 1. It's a heavenly language. It's an angelic language.